When it comes to American political dynasties, the first family name that comes to mind is the Kennedys. They've been in the spotlight for decades and have had their fair share of controversies. The Kennedy family curse is a superstition that's been around for decades. It theorizes that members of the family are doomed to die young because they are cursed by either a family member or outside force. Join Facts First as we take a closer look at the so-called Kennedy family curse while revealing the details of each family member who's died in a tragic way. Rosemary Kennedy's lobotomy. Rosemary Kennedy was the youngest daughter of Joseph and Rose Kennedy. She was born in 1918 and died in 2005. Rosemary had a mental disability that made her slow to learn, but she was still able to read and write. It's theorized she suffered from a lack of oxygen at birth. As she grew up, it became clear she was failing to reach the same developmental milestones as other kids her age. Her parents were worried about her future, so they sent her to a special school for children with disabilities. As a young adult, Rosemary became increasingly irritable, unstable, and prone to violent mood swings. While her mental deficiencies were easier to hide when she was a child, as an adult they became very difficult to cover up. In response to these issues, Rosemary's dad arranged for her to have a prefrontal lobotomy in 1941 when she was 23. It was kept a secret until after it was completed, but sadly it was botched and left young Rosemary permanently incapacitated. She was unable to speak or walk without assistance for the rest of her life. Joe Kennedy Jr. was killed in action. As the eldest Kennedy son, Joe Jr. was always a bit of an overachiever. His father, Joseph Kennedy Sr., had aspirations of him one day becoming the president. Joe Jr. had already started a life in politics when America entered the Second World War. He enlisted in the U.S. Naval Reserve in June of 1941. He trained as a naval aviator and was deployed to Britain. After successfully completing more than 24 combat missions, Joe Jr. volunteered for a top-secret mission called Operation Anvil and Operation Aphrodite. The details of his death were kept sealed until after the war was over, but we eventually learned Joe Jr. died August 12, 1944, while serving as a land-based patrol pilot. He was posthumously awarded the Navy Cross. Following his death, Joseph Sr. transferred his aspirations of raising a future president to his next oldest son, John F. Kennedy. Before we tell you more about the Kennedy curse, be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to Facts First if you haven't already. Kathleen "Kick" Kennedy was killed in a plane crash. Calling Kathleen's life eventful would be a huge understatement. She was JFK's sister and arguably the Kennedy family member with the most adorable nickname. Kick experienced and accomplished quite a bit in her relatively short life. She was a debutante, Red Cross volunteer, and research assistant for the Times-Herald newspaper. Beyond that, she married the Marquis of Hartington, William Billy Cavendish, in May of 1944, making her Lady Hartington. Sadly, she was also hit with one terrible tragedy after another. In September 1944, Kick's husband died in combat just months after their marriage. At age 24, she was a widow. Only 4 years later, she, along with 3 others, died in a small plane crash in France. She was 28. Patrick Kennedy's death was a devastating blow. On August 7, 1963, Jacqueline Kennedy gave birth to a little boy named Patrick. Sadly, since the child was born premature, he lived only 39 hours before dying of complications from hyaline membrane disease. Numerous attempts were made to save his life, but nothing worked. The couple had previously suffered one stillbirth and a miscarriage, so this death was all the more so heartbreaking. Patrick's death shined a light on infantile respiratory diseases and raised the public profile of such afflictions, leading to more research. The JFK Assassination. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy in 1963 was by far one of the most significant moments in U.S. history. On November 22, 1963, President Kennedy was shot while being driven through Dallas, Texas. He was campaigning for re-election, but never got the chance to serve a second term because he was pronounced dead shortly after shots were fired. The alleged assailant, Lee Harvey Oswald, was likewise shot to death by nightclub owner Jack Ruby shortly after his arrest. Although countless conspiracy theories about the event have flooded the public consciousness, one thing is for certain. Oswald, whether he acted alone or was some kind of patsy, deeply hated everything America represented. He had a deep hatred for capitalism and had communist ties. Even though the assassination presented numerous political challenges, the tragedy that Jacqueline and the Kennedy family had to deal with was still devastating beyond measure. RFK's assassination. Robert F. Kennedy, like his brother John, was a prominent member of the Democratic Party. He served as the United States Attorney General between 1961 and 64 before holding the senator's office for New York. Following in his brother's footsteps, in 1968, Robert was one of the leading Democratic presidential candidates. Shortly after he won the California primary on June 5, 1968, Robert was shot and killed by Sirhan Sirhan, a young Palestinian man who claimed he acted in retaliation for Robert's pro-Israeli stance during the Six-Day War in 1967. RFK's assassination prompted a change in the way the Secret Service does its duties. After his death, the service expanded its breadth by also protecting presidential candidates. The Chappaquiddick Incident. On the evening of July 1969, Senator Ted Kennedy left a party held on Chappaquiddick Island to take fellow party guest Mary Jo Kopechne back to the ferry station. While en route to the ferry's landing, Ted's car skidded off a bridge into the water. Ted managed to escape the sinking vehicle and swim to safety, but he fled the scene and didn't report the accident to authorities until 10 a.m. the following morning. At that point, Kopechne's dead body had already been recovered from the submerged vehicle. Ted was found guilty for fleeing the scene of an accident and sentenced to a 2-month suspended jail sentence. He also had his driver's license suspended for 16 months. The incident severely tarnished Ted Kennedy's reputation and soured his political aspirations. At one point, he had dreams of becoming president, but when he finally ran in the 1980 Democratic presidential primaries, he lost in a landslide to future President Jimmy Carter. David Kennedy's overdose death. RFK's fourth son, David, almost drowned to death when he was a boy, but his dad jumped in the water and saved him. The day after his near-death experience, David witnessed his father's assassination on live TV. To cope with the trauma of losing his father in such a horrific way, David turned to recreational drugs. And after being injured in a car accident in 1973, he was left addicted to opioids. Although he tried on numerous occasions to get clean in rehab, following several non-fatal overdoses, he was never able to kick his habit. In April 1984, he was found dead of an overdose of a combination of prescription medications and cocaine. Michael Kennedy's skiing accident. Another one of RFK's kids, Michael, died in a skiing accident in Aspen, Colorado on New Year's Eve 1997. He was evidently tossing a football while on skis with several other family members when he struck a tree. He wasn't wearing any safety equipment or helmet, and prior to the accident, the family had apparently been warned by the ski patrol to stop what they were doing. He was rushed to Aspen Valley Hospital, where he was pronounced dead a little over an hour later. JFK Jr. died in a plane crash. JFK Jr. was born 2 weeks after his dad was elected president, so he was only 2 years old when John was assassinated. In 1999, while working as an attorney in New York City, JFK Jr. flew from New Jersey to Massachusetts via Martha's Vineyard to attend a wedding. In the plane with him was his wife, Carolyn, and his sister-in-law. After the plane didn't make it to its destination on schedule and stopped responding to communications, it was reported missing. At first, investigators had hoped the Kennedys would be found alive, but the wreckage and debris of the aircraft, along with the 3 passengers' bodies, were discovered days later. It's believed Kennedy became disoriented while descending over the water at night with limited visibility. Now it's time to hear from you. Do you think the Kennedys truly have a curse? Let us know in the comments section below. And before you go, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to Factsverse if you haven't already. Click the bell icon to stay updated on all our latest content.